Hello, one and all, and welcome to the SuperShow podcast, episode number 209. I'm your host for this week, Jamie, and I'm very glad to be able to say that I am joined this week by a man who has decided to forego his opportunity to be a part of the new and improved FaZe roster to instead remain the face of the hashtag Free Stellar Blade movement. It's Mr. Alex Jones. Jonesy, tell the folks at home how much side boob means to you.
Look, sometimes there are things in life that you know are more important than anything else, and I've realised in this past week that more important than my family, more important than my children, my future, is side boob.
Yes.
And that is a hill I'm willing to die on. So,
Is that why, can you confirm reports that you have actually taken out the funds and the money that was set aside for your children's educations, their college tuition, if you will, and put that towards raising awareness for the Change.org petition that you are currently spamming around the internet?
you actually heard incorrectly. I've not put away any money for my children and their future up to now. But what I have done is taken out a second mortgage on my house in order to fund that Change.org petition. So if there's a knock at the door by an angry man who wants his money back, you know what that's all about.
Well, if the internet has taught me anything this week, Jonesy, is that there are lots of angry men out there and lots of them do want their money back. But none of them will be asking for any money back from the Super Show podcast because we can, once again, for the second week in a row, confirm to you that the Super Show podcast is 100% uncensored, baby. That's right. Sony Interactive Entertainment can do nothing about the size of my tits, no matter how hard they try. They are going to be, well, they're not quite on camera. I guess I could, squeeze them together, kind of like, I don't know, but you know what?
The people don't believe him. He's lying. But for this, he was in a string vest, and just as we were about to come on air, Sony called us up and they said, "Put on a hoodie." And Jamie, he capitulated. He put the hoodie on. It is not the view that we were hoping for, and that's what we've ended up with, though. So
this is the price we pay to be a PlayStation 5 exclusive podcast. I'm really sorry. Plus, we needed some content to keep behind the Patreon paywall. So anyone who likes the idea of me in a string vest, first of all, what's wrong with you? Second of all, patreon.com/supershow. That is the home of the Patreon exclusive content for this very podcast that you were listening to. But of course, basically all the content that we produce, like 99.9% of the content that we produce nowadays, is free for you to enjoy on whatever platform you wish. Whether it's on YouTube, whether you can join the live stream and say hello to us in real time, whether it's on YouTube and you're watching the VOD, in which case, hello, maybe leave a comment in the comment section down below. And of course, you can always catch up on your favorite podcasting platform, whether that's Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, maybe even something completely different. Though I think there are still 9 or 10 others that we are randomly shat out onto for 1 or 2 people in, I'm going to say, Indonesia to listen to, in which case, I don't know what hello is in your native tongue, but I hope you feel most welcome to this episode of the Super Show pod, where, Jonesy, I'm going to break some disappointing news. We're not going to be getting into the ins and outs of Eve's areolas. Is that our areolas nipple? Is that a nipple thing?
yeah,
or is that a lung thing?
No, areolas is
Areola.
it's the area around the nipple. Absolutely, you are right. Interestingly, I could give you some information about that part of the body, but I'm not going to, because obviously being a father, I've had to learn more than you'd probably want to know about areolas and nipples. So,
yeah, no, I've just put 2 and 2 together. Well, if ever we get to the point where Shift Up are looking into some breastfeeding DLC for Celebrate, just throwing things out there,
I would buy that. I would get that DLC.
I think a lot of people would pay good money for that. So again, Sony, again, if you are listening out there, we need to have a few conversations to make sure that everything that we want to do gets approved in the way we want it to get approved. We don't want to let down the fans of areolas out there. But clearly, we are ideas men, and we're here to provide.
Okay.
Folks that love tits.
Let me throw a curveball at you. There's a little part of me which is tempted to say that between now and next week, because I've not done it this week, because I was woefully underinformed about how annoyed some people were about the state of Stellar Blade.
Sure.
Obviously, off the back of our last podcast, we were excited about the fact that it was very uncensored, and they were excited about their 017 rating that they got. Obviously, the times have changed, and some people are not happy because they are saying that there has been blatant censorship of the game.
Indeed.
I do not know enough about what they're talking about, and it seems like they are talking a lot of rubbish. However, I am willing to say that I am not well informed enough, and I'm considering over the next week really looking into the issue and coming down next week and trying to definitively say one way or the other.
You know what?
What do you reckon? Should we have a pop at that?
I would be interested to hear that, because I think the other element when it comes to our capacity to discuss Stellar Blade thoroughly is the fact that neither you or I have played Stellar Blade at the moment beyond the demo that was, of course, made available on PSN. But given that we have just been paid, or at least I have just been paid, I don't want to speak for anyone else out there.
Me too, matey, me too.
There you go. And that the upcoming weekend is, in fact, a bank holiday weekend for those of you in the right parts of the world.
Is it?
Yeah. It's
this
next
coming weekend?
This coming weekend is a 3-day weekend, yeah. Monday, the 6th of April, is the first of 2 bank holidays in the month of April. There's another one like 3 weeks after.
I love that.
Yeah. I don't know. Again, I don't know who died or who had to like win a war or whatever for that to happen, but I thank them posthumously. So I plan to have played some of Stellar Blade by next week's episode of the podcast, which may well tie into your desire to be better informed about the ongoing debate, the ongoing drama surrounding a Change.org petition that is and amassed a simply inconceivable number of signatures, each of which I presume represent people who are genuinely annoyed at the quote-unquote censorship that may or may not have taken place in this fascinating little video game.
I'm gonna make a bet with myself that the other side of this bank holiday weekend, once you've played some Stellar Blade, there will be one additional signee on that Change.org petition with the your lovely little face may even appear in a video.
I was going to say, not just one additional signee, but one additional video on the Change.org. I'm going to lend my voice to the movement. Me and Grums, brothers in arms, all the way. Of course, we jest. It's very hard to know the specifics and the ins and outs of debates like these. And I think Jonesy does kind of speak for me as well when I say that you never know whether you're treading on anyone's toes with audiences like ours. It's hard to know whether you're kind of like pissing people off or whether you're being the voice of the people. It does seem a little bit silly. I know that some people think that this is about more than just tits and arse, and that there's a wider debate to be had about censorship, and then that probably ties into further debates and freedom of speech and all that kind of, and that's the kind of the nitty-gritty that I actually don't really want to get into on a podcast like this, because it feels like it's a lose-lose situation. So instead, we will carve out some time to chat about other gaming-related news. So if you're, for example, interested in a few updates on the Nintendo Switch 2, whatever that piece of hardware ends up being called, we will have you covered this episode of the podcast, because we've got a few hot tidbits of the press from a Chinese peripheral manufacturer, no less. But we're also going to be chatting about Fallout, which continues to be one of the stories that will not die down, having Amazon have released the numbers around the viewership of their new TV show on Amazon Prime, and that it has done exceedingly well. That then ties in some interesting conversations about Microsoft and Xbox and Bethesda, and how prepared they were for just how successful this TV show has been, and also the wider Xbox picture as we look forward to their game showcase on June 9th. We're going to be breaking down all of that, what Xbox have to offer, what we can look forward to this year, and what Bethesda's plans might be for Fallout in the long-term future. And we're going to round things out with a little bit of a chat about a game that Jonesy and I know absolutely nothing about at the end of the podcast, with Escape from Tarkov. But at least, if nothing else, we can have a good laugh about it, because it sounds like they have thoroughly cocked up their DLC situation over there. And when price tags like $250 are being floated around, Jonesy, not only do my eyes water, but I feel like I need to know more. And so that's what we'll be chatting about a bit later on. But for now, I wondered, Mr. Jones, if I could pique your interest with a little bit of chatter about the Nintendo Switch 2. Well, actually, what do you think this thing's even going to be called? Because in the world of Pros this and Series that, and Nintendo are obviously, famous for going as rogue as they go when it comes to console naming. Need I remind anyone of the Nintendo Wii U? What are we talking about here? Bit of an odd level to begin things on, but I'm curious.
It's going to be a pun, almost a pun. It's going to be a play on words. It's not going to be the Switch 2. It's going to be the Nintendo Switcheroo.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. What have you just done? What have you just released upon this world? The Nintendo Switcheroo.
Yeah.
is so good and somehow so bad at the same time that I now worry I've put myself in a position, or you've put me in a position, where anything else is going to be disappointing.
I really hope it's the switcheroo. Like Nintendo's such a weird company as well, because they're so good, yet they're also so cringe that I feel like anything's possible. Like it could be the next greatest best thing, and we're all gonna love it, and we all need it. But it could also be the most cringe, like boomer tech you've ever seen, and they could just do stuff that you're like, why have they done this?
Yeah.
So I think the Nintendo Switcheroo has got possibilities behind it.
Well, I'm 100% backing you in on the naming front. Unfortunately, though, on the hardware front, it looks like this might be a little bit more of a conservative situation. Obviously, historically, we look at Nintendo's hardware output. They have, at times, taken big punches, taken big swings, if you will, when it comes to following up successful piece of hardware, and they haven't always worked out. Certainly when it comes to their mainline home consoles, if you will, when you look at kind of the jumps from the N64 to the GameCube to the Wii and then to the Wii U, there are all kind of weird things going on when it comes to the actual hardware itself, the target market, the USPs, and even the naming. I've got a feeling, based on some of the elements that we're about to discuss now, that they're playing it a little bit safer, which makes sense given how successful the Switch has been, and maybe looking at something more akin to the trajectory that the Game Boys had, where we had Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, and then obviously various iterations on the Game Boy Advance, some of which were a little bit radical. That was when they first, they went down that weird, like, flip. It was the Game Boy Advance SD or SP, the one that had, like, the little flip design with the, So they've pushed the boat out before. The understanding, though, increasingly with the Switch 2 is that won't be the case. And a lot of this new reporting is coming from a Chinese peripheral manufacturer, which kind of reminds me of back in the days when iPhone leaks were still extremely relevant and hot news on the internet. And it would often be the people who got to, for example, make cases for the latest iPhone, who would be like, we don't know anything about what's inside this thing, but we do know its shape. So we can create like drastically or like, realistic or accurate 3D models of it that serve no other purpose.
Yeah.
Do you remember those days?
I do. I fondly remember those days. It seems like I don't. That in some ways that's more fun those days, because it's more form factor's fine, but you don't know the insides. Whereas I think we're this them being more conservative with the hardware and actually the insides of it not being as exciting as maybe some people were hoping for. There's less promise for the future, Jamie.
There is, and I suppose that's kind of like the downside to a potential story like this, is that in some respects, the more risk-averse Nintendo we're talking about, the less interesting a console we end up with, whether that's a success or a failure, because, consoles that crash and burn, historically speaking, can be just as fascinating to reflect upon as successful ones. But a lot of this information actually has to do with backwards compatibility, both on a hardware level and a software level, and it's one of those things where, to put it bluntly, the more backwards compatible things appear to be, the more that we can safely assume that we're talking about a console that is very familiar to owners or users of a Nintendo Switch in the past. Talking initially, for example, about controllers and Joy-Cons, the report suggests that the console will support both the current Pro controller, which isn't that surprising, but Joy-Con controllers as well, and the HD Rumble will return. The thing that apparently is going to be different, and this is kind of the first talking point that has got tongues wagging on the internet this past week, is that while current Joy-Con controllers will be compatible with the Nintendo Switch 2, so if you've got, like 8 of those neon, Joy-Cons at home that you spent a ludicrous amount of money on, then don't worry, you haven't put that money down the drain. It won't be possible to attach them to the console in handheld mode, i.e. so you'll have to attach them via Bluetooth and use one of those kind of brackets that turns them into a controller. And that is because of a new horizontal magnetic docking system, which will only support new versions of the controllers, essentially suggesting, Jonesy, that the technology that they're using to pair or attach physically new Joy-Cons to this new console will be magnetic suction that's achieved through electromagnetic suction technology controlled by electric current. That all sounds like a level of, like, there's a reason I didn't finish my science GCSEs. That sounds like a level above what I can understand, but it does sound high tech.
Does it? It sounds like a load of rubbish that they've tried to put some words together to make it sound techie. But when it comes to the actual like the thrust of what they're saying here is that your Joy-Cons will work, but you won't be able to attach them. I'm like that. I'm completely fine with that. If you want to change the body, the shape, the anything to do with like how the new Joy-Cons connect, absolutely. I don't think you should be limited to make it so that the old ones can connect and charge. The fact that they still connect and work and you can still use them, it's just that they're not. And the Switch 2 is obviously going to come with 2 attached anyway. So I don't think that's an issue. I'm grateful they didn't do the thing of saying, oh well, we've changed the shape of it, so now they won't fit, so now they don't work.
Yes.
Which I wouldn't have been surprised if that had been said. But for them not to do that, as you said, I've spent a ludicrous amount of money on Joy-Con controllers over the years.
They're still so expensive, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm grateful that they've done that.
But then I guess the question then becomes, and don't get me wrong, I'm not going to ask you to become an overnight expert at the ins and outs of electromagnetic suction technology, because I'm sure it's relatively as new to you as it is to me. But there is an element here, if they're going through the work on, theoretically, I guess, the software side, the compatibility side, to make sure that OG Joy-Cons still function with this new Switch, and that if you wanted to do kind of like, the setup where you had the Joy-Cons loose in your hands and the Switch, elsewhere, maybe with a kickstand, or if you wanted to have the Joy-Cons attached to that kind of bracket that turned them into a controller, like I mentioned before, if you're going through the effort to make sure all that stuff still works, surely, if you're going to go that extra step and say, but physically they're not going to reattach because we're pushing for this new technology, there has to be something about that new technology that makes it worth that sacrifice. Because this electromagnetic suction thing is the only thing that's stopping them saying old school Joy-Cons are forwards compatible across the board, which would be a nice selling point.
It would.
So it's got to be somewhat useful.
The weird thing about saying it's magnetic. Electromagnetic suction is okay, so you don't just want to say that you've got like suction cups on the side that how your Joy-Cons are gonna fit. That's fine. So you're gonna use some way you're gonna have electromagnets which then cause the suction to be there. But if it runs out of battery, are they gonna fall off?
Good question.
I think there's a couple of interesting things here. Unless the whole point is that an electromagnet is the thing which pulls the Joy-Cons into place, and then you have suckers that are then compressed and the air comes out, and then there's suction. So then it's like a 2-phase thing. And so if the battery runs out, it still attaches. But I'm with you. I'm like, what is the point of all this? Like the existing controllers worked perfectly well. You did have some issues with them when you're trying to locate them and put them on, and sometimes if you tried to put the wrong one on the wrong way, but that doesn't happen very often. Like, and
as someone who has not just experienced life with a Nintendo Switch, but also life with kids and a Nintendo Switch, those Joy-Cons, when they're attached properly to that console, they never feel like they're going to come off.
No,
they don't. There's nothing about the current attachment system that feels lacking when it comes to they feel like they're going to slide off while I'm playing, or I accidentally hit the latch and they begin to slide up. If anything, they're a little bit stiff, which can lead sometimes, I think, when people first bought the console and were being very careful and delicate with it, led to some people struggling to get them out because they were like, how hard do I have to yank this thing to slide it off the rail?
They have a really satisfying clunk as well when you put them on. There's like the catch and everything's like a nice, everything feels like it's fits together really nicely. And I completely agree. At no point did I think it felt cheap. I've never had any issues with the actual Joy-Cons being located or staying in place. The only issue I've had with Joy-Cons the whole time I've had them is connection issues with the Bluetooth. I've never a physical connection problem, or maybe it's when you're trying to play games where you're switching between orientations of controllers and one person using 2 controllers, 2 people using one of the small controllers each, and it's all down to the Bluetooth. So I don't really know what problem they're trying to solve with this magnetic suction issue. Right. I will have to raise at this point, just in case anyone in watching this doesn't realize that suction is a myth. So I just have to raise that. So
you're going to have to clarify what you mean by that. Suction is a myth.
Yeah, suction doesn't exist insofar as we think of it. It's an effect.
Do I want to know more about this, or is this a rabbit hole that
you don't?
Suction doesn't exist. So what is it? What's my vacuum cleaner doing?
It's pushing air out, and then the pressure behind the
You're saying
the pressure
what?
of the atmosphere then forces air up the nozzle of your vacuum cleaner. It works in reverse to
pushing
how
air
you
out.
think. There's no pull with suction. It's actually all push.
When I put my hand, the palm of my hand, flat against the end of a vacuum cleaner
Yes.
nozzle,
Yes.
why do I experience what I would describe as suction then?
Because the atmospheric pressure behind your hand is pushing against it, and the air is trying to rush past your hand into the nozzle to fill the vacuum which has been created inside the vacuum cleaner. There's no pull in suction, it's all push of atmosphere.
That sensation that I'm feeling is actually the back of my hand being pushed into the nozzle.
Not wholly. It's the push from behind your hand of the air. It's all of the air all around your hand. So it's either side of the nozzle. It's behind it. It's all around it. All this atmospheric pressure is trying to rush to get into that void, that gap, and all that pressure is forcing all that air in there. There is no pull of a vacuum, which is a myth that a lot of people think there is. Which is why space doesn't suck all of the gas off of the Earth.
Okay. There is another rabbit hole I'd love to go down here when it comes to the dynamics of suction. That I think you could probably imagine what I'm thinking of, and I'm pretty sure
it's all push, mate. It's all push.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure if you ask, I have no first-hand experience of doing such an act.
What are you admitting?
I'm pretty sure if you asked a practitioner of such an act, they would suggest that they weren't in fact blowing outwards or creating or like. Do you know what I mean?
No, yeah,
like,
they're not blowing. In that instance, what you're thinking of, you're shrinking an area, right, to reduce the gas, to reduce the volume of gas. You're then expanding the area without allowing any more gas in, which is then causing, like we're saying, a pressure differential for the atmospheric pressure is then trying to push that in. So you're getting the effect is what we call suction, but that doesn't actually exist insofar as people think of a pulling force. There is no pulling force within suction. It's all a pushing force of external pressures.
It definitely doesn't feel like it. There's parts of
my
my bodies that can give very vivid testimonials to the account that suggest it does not feel like what you're describing, but I'm not scientific enough to argue with you on those facts.
I'm glad.
When Jones,
I can't be challenged.
No, this is a message out there to anyone listening. When you've known Jonesy for as long as I have, when he sounds like he knows what he's talking about on subjects like these, it's just not worth it. Because even if
I'm wrong, I won't give in.
Even if you're wrong, like there's no point in the extent that one would have to go to one, find out if you're wrong, only to then realize that you wouldn't admit it. It's just not worth the energy. But I believe you. I believe you.
Look, the Earth is flat, the sky isn't blue, and Eve has been censored. That's all I'm saying.
There you go. These are the facts. You argue with the facts, you're arguing with the man, and I would not advise it, personally speaking. Well, do you know one thing that would suck, Jonesy?
What is that?
Is if the Nintendo Switch didn't have backwards compatibility on a software level, which is why it's encouraging that MobaPad, that's kind of the source for a lot of this newly found information, have revealed that the Nintendo Switch 2 will be fully backwards compatible with both physical and digital versions of the original Switch games. I know you and I, and going all the way back to even getting Chris involved, have had plenty of debates over the years about the backwards compatibility.
I said it wouldn't be at all. I said no way.
Yeah. Well, again, these are. I'm not even going to call these confirmed rumors. These are just rumors. This is a Chinese peripheral manufacturer, so pinch of salt, of course.
I must admit, my reasoning was like, look at the Wii U, look at the fact that they resold so many games, and made so much money doing it. Like, would they risk not having the opportunity to do that? But then, I believe both you and Chris both said there would be some backwards compatibility, but I was adamant there wouldn't be.
Yeah.
Happy to be wrong. Totally happy to be wrong.
I think they'll still try and do both as well. Like, I can see a world in which a Nintendo Switch successor comes out and that Breath of the Wild is both backwards compatible and has some kind of complete edition out there that runs at a higher resolution, a higher frame rate, and has that DLC included.
The ultimate version, the ultimate edition of Breath of the Wild, yeah.
I could see something like that happening, which, allows those kind of updated and improved versions of software to coexist with backwards compatibility, and Nintendo still get paid, which is what they're in the market for at the end of the day. This report also goes on to say that the console will retain USB-C port for a USB-C port for docking, which isn't that surprising, and presumably still means that any of those, again, weirdly expensive to buy on their own adapters for the original Switch will still be compatible. One thing that's less clear is that it seems like there will be a new generation of docks that feature minor design improvements, such as a metal bracket for improved angle adjustments. It doesn't say anything about or make any notes about the potential backwards compatibility of docks. I know there have been, there's always some degree of speculation about whether Nintendo would ever go in for a dock that added some form of hardware or some form of firepower to a Switch. Like, could you sneak a little bit of extra tech in some of that plastic? Because Lord knows there's a lot of real estate inside those things that's just empty plastic. If you actually root through what's there, it's really just a glorified
HDMI
USB.
and a USB cable. Yeah,
Exactly. Like, could they sneak a few bits in there that mean, like, hey, if you dock this thing, especially with 4K TVs becoming the standard, 4K outputs becoming an almost necessity, are they going to rely on the handheld to do that exclusively, or are they going to sneak a little something into the dock? We don't know.
That would be amazingly interesting if all of the stuff we hear about the Switch 2 is coming in from the handheld, and then when it actually comes out, we find out that they've snuck a few things into the dock to actually boost its capabilities when it was docked, to give it a little bit of a bump, like a dongle-esque. Would be interesting. I'm not sure they would at all. Probably wouldn't, but it would be an interesting move.
And they're definitely going to have to think of something, because the next conversation point on this report is indeed about resolutions. It suggests that the Switch 2 will support 4K resolution when docked, which, as we just outlined there, is kind of, you feel like it's a growing necessity given just the kind of TVs people have in homes around the world. And that in handheld mode, the console will feature an 8-inch display with a 1080p resolution. For anyone wondering, the current setup, I think, is a 6.2-inch on the standard Switch, a 7-inch on the OLED. So it's at least a 1-inch to close to 2-inch improvement, depending on which model you're upgrading from. And they are both 720p. So there will be, a nice enough and sort of like notable bump in resolution. And as anyone out there with a Steam Deck, for example, will be able to tell you, because those form factors are still so small, and even an 8-inch screen in the grand scheme of things is relatively slight, a 1080p resolution on an 8-inch display goes a long way, and you can get some pretty, sharp-looking titles. So I think that's absolutely fine. But yeah, this goes back to exactly what we were saying. How will Nintendo achieve a 4K resolution on... what techniques are they going to implement? Will they be in the handheld itself? Will there be dock stuff? Are they going to rely on kind of the various up-resing technologies out there? Are they going to lean on Nvidia and borrow or create some kind of weird form of a DLSS or a DLSS-like technology for super sampling and upsampling?
They have to, don't they? It does.
It seems like it.
Like, at no point is a Nintendo Switch game developer really targeting 4K, realistic. No. Then you're immediately going to, okay, so what form of upscaling are they going to be doing?
Yeah, because I don't know about you, and I can't remember what your split is in terms of how often you're handheld and how often you're docked. But I docked. This all sounds weirdly sexual. I apologize, but I did a bit of docking, over the Christmas period. Just out of sheer curiosity, to look at what Tears of the Kingdom looked like on my TV. Obviously at 1080p, which was what the Switch currently outputs to when docked. And I was like, this is really fucking ugly, and it seems like it's struggling.
Yes,
the
idea of a Switch 2 being 4K on a dock display, I'm like, really? It sounds like we might as well be talking about 8K textures and 8K gaming. I don't buy it, especially at any kind of decent frame rate without it just being, no, it's totally 1080p native resolution, and then they do some sort of upscaling to call it 4K when at no point is it actually really 4K.
Right. Especially because we mentioned the Steam Deck already. There are a lot of other handhelds out there at the moment on the market that are basically like mini PCs. and
Yeah.
you couldn't HDMI out with them and like have games running acceptably well. Or it would be a stretch to have things running at 4K, if you HDMI'd out of a Steam Deck, right?
Honestly, I don't know enough about the Steam Deck and about Res, but I know that I I know that with something like the Steam Deck is leaps and bounds ahead of where the current version of the Switch is with regards to like power and ability, and the fact that, like as you're saying there, like the Steam Deck wouldn't be able to do it. So the idea that suddenly Nintendo are going to have that jump is like, yeah, they may be, but only with some sort of technology which is doing the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, how is it actually looking? Like, because there's 4K and there's 4K. Like if you're saying 4K, but you're talking about like certain games and super simplistic stuff and very easy to produce textures and games that can nail high frame rates at decent resolutions, but only because we're not really doing any major. The console's not having to do anything major in regards to like the graphical side. Then yes, but I don't know. It's a strange world these days.
It's a strange one, yeah.
It's like you can say things are 4K and that they're running at 60, but then is that really comparable with something else which is supposed to be doing the same thing when one is so much, got so much more going on than another? Like I don't know. What's the Animal Crossing comes out in 4K? I'm like, okay, fine. Like
right, okay, yeah, I see what you mean.
Like it's.
I think there's also the element of like Microsoft and Sony have spent the last, I don't even know how long, basically since the release of the PlayStation 4 Pro and the Xbox One X, whenever that was, 2016, 2017. So as long as the Switch has been around, those two platform manufacturers have been allowed to waltz around, parade around, touting 4K resolutions while hitting them natively on the tiniest number of occasions.
Yeah.
Like 4K. We're talking about PS5 Pros, and like 4K still doesn't mean 4K at the moment. No. Every game that you're playing at like nowadays on your PS5, any of the hot new releases you've played in the year of our Lord 2024, they've all been running at 1080p, 1200p, 1440p, something like some implementation of dynamic resolution, and then they've all used, whether it's FSR2 or now FSR3 or something else entirely. There's been upscaling, there's been checkerboarding, there's been all sorts. So I think it would be a little bit unfair to hold Nintendo to account. Like, I don't expect many things, if anything, like first party, let's say, to run at a native 4K. I think it's maybe just more about having a console that has the capacity to, support a 4K output, and so like the UI, for example, and the UX looks sharp on 4K screens, which might be because it's important future proofing. Because if Nintendo's release pattern and cadence kind of stays the same, as weird as it is to say out loud, like this is the Switch or the Nintendo console we're going to be playing on until 2031.
That is,
and who knows where TVs will be by then, So they have to be cognizant of that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and you're absolutely right. That's exactly where my brain goes to as well. Is that Nintendo have never been as worried about trying to be a cutting edge when it comes to like resolutions and frame rates. They're just trying to make games that are fun to play and look alright. Having, especially with the Switch, like playing it docked has always seemed like a secondary concern to them. And then the idea that that's going to suddenly completely change, when we expect, like you say, when PlayStation 5, I mean, we're going to talk about Fallout 4 having its upgrade, and the fact that we're talking about a game that old that's still, is that running native like at 4K at 60 FPS? Like, no. So what are we talking about?
No, you're absolutely right. It's also like Nintendo are the masters of getting a lot out of a little, and like how many people out there know that, depending on whether they did so handheld or docked, how many people know that they played Super Mario Odyssey at 720p? It was one of the best looking games of that year, and that was all through art direction and all the basically all the things that Nintendo, especially when it comes to their first party output, are masters at and will continue to be in all likelihood.
And that's all they need to, like, they don't need to worry about that much that side of it as much, because as long as the games they put out, the first party stuff, is as good as it is, like I'm not complaining. Like I'm not playing Mario Wonder complaining about frame rate and resolution. I'm just having like a blast. So
yeah, exactly. That's the power of Nintendo, and I'm sure it will continue to be as such. But we will find out more as we continue to roll on closer to the Nintendo Switch successor's eventual reveal and release. I believe that the latest murmurings are still that the console is targeting somewhere around the early parts of 2025. I think that presumably means we will see the console in some way, shape, or form this year, unless plans change. So that's exciting, something to look forward to as we continue to roll on to. Well, we're damn near we're getting closer to the second half of 2024, I guess, in a weird way. Not quite. It's still
That's
very
mad,
firmly
isn't it?
Q2, but yeah, time waits for no man, as it turns out, Jonesy. Neither do live streams. And I was wondering, and I know you love to be the master of ceremonies when it comes to keeping an eye on this podcast, which of course is streamed out live on YouTube for anyone who wants to join in the fun. As it happens, I wondered if you wanted to give any shout outs to any folks at home.
I would love to. Yeah, in the chat right now on YouTube, we have got joining us Rodrigo, Magni, the Funky Penguin, Slick 1977, Wesley Theobodo, Ames in there, Exeter Black. We have also got 69 DJ, Pastors Guild coming in there. So thank you so much for everybody for joining us in the live. I am watching all of your comments and loving that you are agreeing with me, especially about the Rodrigo said when we were talking about suction, Jamie, it's all atmospheric pressure, just science things, Jamie. So just don't worry about it.
I thank you, Rodrigo. I feel like I've now got a new pickup line the next time at the bar. I said, "Don't worry, baby. It's only atmospheric pressure."
Pushing us together.
Yeah.
We've also, I should say, we've just had a comment come in from Martin Ruffle, friend of the show, from the Just Interesting podcast. If you like things that are a hell of a lot more than just interesting, you should give them a little listen, give them a check out on podcast.
Absolutely. Shout out to Rough Dog and shout out to Just Interesting. Jonesy, the other great thing about live streaming this podcast is we get the audience interaction, but audience also means we get audience suggestions, which was what, of course, many months ago now birthed the arrival of one of the most hotly anticipated segments of any podcast when the time rolls around. It's when we talk about the games that are coming out this month.
That is one of my favorite things to do regularly, a few times a month.
It's just like, do you know what? Like, why don't we just up it? Let's go to 3, maybe even 4 times a month. Every single week, we're going to remind you of the game. No, I'm joking. But it is a thing now. It is a fixture of the Super Show podcast, whether we like it or not. So how about we let the folks at home in on what they can look forward to in the month of May, which starts tomorrow, I'll have you know, because Jonesy was giving me a bit of a ribbing about adding this to the podcast, as if we were going to do it next week and let you guys know on the 6th of May or the 7th of May which games are coming out this month.
It was joke.
We would never let the audience down like that. I just want to make it clear.
I was actually thinking as you were saying that, I think I'm going to clip this as well and put this out as an individual little clip for so people can see what's coming up for the month of May as well. So I'm glad you did decide to.
You know how when it comes to digital media, there's that idea of evergreen content, Jonesy?
That is what this is.
No, I was going to say this is actually the furthest away imaginable thing from that. Like if there were a spectrum and evergreen were at one end, us talking about the games that are coming out this month on a live streamed podcast that you then clip out and then upload individually to YouTube, probably at some point in the next week, to then exist in perpetuity for anyone that in like the year 2028 was like, do you know what? I wonder what was coming out in May of 2024.
Do you know the only thing which is less evergreen than that? Weekly video game news.
Oh, depressing.
Immediately irrelevant.
Yeah. Equally depressing is the fact that there's almost nothing of any real note coming out in the first week of May. And I sometimes say that with a little bit of caution because I don't want to actually upset anyone that's really looking forward to some weird anime game that's coming out. I just have to look through the list and pick out the games that I recognize. I apologize if that upsets anyone at home. What won't upset anyone, though, is the arrival, potentially at least, of Animal Well on the 9th of May, which I just wanted to pick out because for anyone that might have forgotten, that is actually going to be the first title published by Big Mode, which of course is the video game label owned and run controversially by YouTuber Video Game Donkey. So for anyone who remembers that whole furore, that debate, that back and forth when Donkey created his own publisher, if you wanted to know what the fruits of his and the developer's labor looked like, Animal Well on May the 9th, also on that day, for anyone who saw the recent Nintendo live stream, Little Kitty, Big City. Not a reference to vaginas, just another opportunity to play as a cat. Jokes, sorry. Also, equally, actually,
that's my new favorite name for a hentai porno, Little Kitty Big City, which is just that's amazing. So, oh, come, that is.
They knew what they were doing. Again, in true Stellar Blade fashion, they knew what they were doing. Eve
In my
DLC,
mind,
Little Kitty Big City, anyone?
in my mind, like the opening shot is just this young, like Japanese girl walking up the stairs of the underground, just like looking up at this big city. She's about to get railed by like everyone. Oh, sorry that you've got me there.
Let's move swiftly on with some real hardcore serious games. Anyone looking forward to Homeworld 3, the long anticipated title? There you go. Jonesy's got his hand up. The 13th of May, good sir, it is not too far away. Then from a game that Jonesy will play to a game that Jonesy probably won't, because he'll find some weird excuse to. The Rogue Prince of Persia. It may have only just been announced, but it is, of course, coming out in early access on the 14th of May. And then just coming day after day, we're then on the 15th of May, Braid Anniversary Edition. A great opportunity to go back and play a classic indie title from the XBLA era, for anyone that missed that. Also, one of the subjects of one of the best video game documentaries. I think it was called Indie Game the Movie, for anyone who wanted a little bit of insight into Jonathan Blow and his creation process during that.
I just want to give a shout out to Braid Anniversary Edition, because one thing I've noticed a lot lately, and I keep seeing it, and it kind of feels like a bit of a sea change, is that's coming to Netflix as well. And there's a lot of good games now which are popping up on Netflix, which is it feels like the beginning of something is starting to shift. Like, obviously games have been on Netflix for a while. We've talked about some releasing on that before, but if you pop over to your Netflix app right now, you'll see some titles that you recognize on there. And yeah, adding Braid to that stable is very cool.
Absolutely. I'm always pleasantly surprised every time I remind myself as a Netflix subscriber to open the app and be like, oh, these are all the games that I can just play as a part of my existing subscription. This is hashtag not an ad. But Netflix, if you do want to get in touch, I mean,
give us some of that Netflix money. Yeah,
we will take your money. Also taking your money once again are Sony, who are continuing their pattern of porting their hit games to PC with Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut. That lands on the 16th of May, which is the same day that you can get your hands on Lorelei and the Laser Eyes on PC and Switch. You might have seen that again in some recent Nintendo streams. That is the follow-up from the developer of Sayonara Wild Hearts, which was a bit of a cult hit back in the day. Then we get to see one of Xbox's big title for the year that we know of thus far on the 21st of May, when Senua's Saga Hellblade 2 comes out. I know we've gone back and forth on this a little bit. We had a little bit of a debate in recent weeks when we were reviewing some of the recent gameplay footage. I'm reminding myself that at the end of the day, I am excited for Hellblade 2. I will give it a go. It being on Game Pass day one obviously helps it become a bit of a no-brainer. But I'm very curious to see how that one turns out. Another title that's actually been courting a bit of a controversy, given its status as a remake that actually runs at half the frame rate of the game that it is remaking. Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door comes out on the Nintendo Switch on the 23rd of May. Multiverses, the Smash Bros. Inspired brawler featuring a favorite Warner Brothers character, returns after its absolutely bizarre leave of absence on the 28th of May. And we round out the May for all you petrol heads with F1 24. Which is coming to basically every single console. Everyone who ever wanted to step into the boots of Max Verstappen and feel just how sweaty an F1 driver's feet get as they do laps of Monaco, you can find out, apparently. That's not actually from the official press release, just my interpretation of the trailer.
I'm sure I saw an interview one time of Lewis Hamilton, and he said during the course of a race, he loses like 4 kilos in weight. Like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think he said that on Graham Norton.
Right, yeah. And I was like, that madness, isn't it? It's the amount of like physicality behind something like that. I know it's very long as well, but
have you seen some of the exercises they have to do in preparation for it, where kind of some of their ability to resist what I imagine is like the G-force and stuff like that, and so they're having to like turn a steering wheel that looks like it has God knows how much pressure applied to it, and they have those straps that kind of pull their head in the opposite direction when they're turning, and all those
They now
kind of
show
things.
you the G-force that they're experiencing through the turns during the qualifiers and stuff, which I think is amazing. Like the amount of G's they're pulling is ridiculous. It's like
Yeah.
I was watching qualifiers last weekend. I think, and I don't watch Formula One usually, and I think they're 5 or 6 G's through corners, which seems crazy. But fair play to them.
Outrageous. One of those sports where it's easy to underestimate just how much of an athlete you actually have to be competitive. At the top level of Formula One, one thing that it's not hard to be competitive at is the ranking of our supporters on Patreon, though. All you have to do is spend the most money and you win instantly, which actually, now that I say that out loud, is not dissimilar to how getting into Formula One works. Slightly different when you're on the track.
That's how you get a Formula One team and win. Yeah, pay the most money.
Just have the richest dad. Have a dad that can literally buy
you a team.
Others to buy you a team, and then seemingly a championship and an engineer and a factory. And anyway, F1 jokes aside, this podcast is made possible at this point exclusively by your support on Patreon. It's what keeps us coming back week after week. Failing drastically at giving you timely and interestingly delivered news, but we're still doing it, and some of you are still watching and or listening, and for that we say thank you. So if you head over to patreon.com/SuperShow, then what you'll find is a range of tiers that you can pledge at, and each of those tiers will see you granted various rewards, whether you're interested in access to our Discord server, whether you're interested in Patreon exclusive content, videos, podcasts, all the things that we've recorded over the years. Patreon.com/SuperShow is the place to go to check any of that out. And I would like to acknowledge some of the fine folk that have already gone over there and done exactly that. There are some names on screen right now. Huge shout out to each and every one of them. But I would also like to give a slightly more personal shout out to Aaron Cameron, Athletic Gravy, Brimstone, I Snort Rock Salt, Jesper Camdal Nielsen, Pastors Guild, and Xander GTI. And then, of course, we have the big dogs, the members of the board, the ones whose dads really paid for their way into the Patreon. Brett Z, a.k.a. Shellshock, Geometric Potter, Hacksaw Bookread, Manuel Guerrero, and Peaswad. Thank you all so much, and if each and every one of you could ask your parents to dip into their pockets once again so Jonesy and I can afford to buy Still a Blade before next week's episode, that would be great.
I would love to give it a really good going over to make sure I'm doing my maximum amount of research.
Oh, I bet. I can already imagine the camera angles that you're going to be fixing up in your little playthrough of Still a Blade. But
I would love to see an Anita Sarkeesian old school Femme Frequency video specifically about Stellar Blade. But
what if you put a wig on and do like a satirical one?
Maybe we'll see how things go. I used to like that. I used to watch that show.
Sarkeesian.
Yeah, ooh. Does she even do? I guess she doesn't do it anymore. It's been a long time, but yeah, I guess not.
I don't know. Do you know what? It's been a long time since I've looked that lady up. I never went that deep down that rabbit hole when it came to sort of like what I now we're technically increasingly having to probably refer to as Gamergate 1. But I never really got into the weeds on exactly how a lot of that played out, Anita Sarkeesian's role in it. I never watched any of the feminist frequency content.
I see. I watched it all before Gamergate. I was a subscriber and watched it pre that. So I was but then it got weird. Anyway, I didn't mean to derail where you were going and ruin stuff.
I was going somewhere weird as well because I was going to make a joke, obviously having acknowledged that we haven't had time to play Still a Blade yet. I was going to say, now that we know that you haven't spent the past week staring at anime titties, I was going to ask you what you have indeed spent the last week doing.
Well, do you know what? I wanted to spend a week, and in the end, it only ended up being 5 days because I had a bit of an issue getting into the game, which I was trying to play. Which I talked briefly about last week. It was Fallout 4. I wanted to jump on that Fallout train, and I wanted to experience that again. And was waiting for the update, but like I said, I tried to install it, had some issues, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, roll on the actual day that it was released, the Fallout 4 update. And then there were more issues, hurrah, whereby effectively if you had Fallout 4 through the PlayStation Store, which I didn't. I have it on disc, couldn't find the disc anywhere, so it was like, sod it, I'll download it from the store. We'll do that.
Download it through not download it through the store, but download it through PlayStation Plus. Am I right?
Through PlayStation Plus, you're correct.
The store would imply you'd bought a digital copy, which you wasn't.
No, I did not. I downloaded it through PlayStation Plus, as you've said. I have got the top tier of PlayStation Plus membership, which, so effectively, as it all came out, was all the wrinkles fell out. What we found out was, despite Bethesda saying that the update for PlayStation 5 was going to seemingly be free to everyone, what they've ended up doing is making PlayStation 5 update available to people who are above the PlayStation Plus Essentials package. So if you have PlayStation Plus Essentials, which is the lowest tier of the three, you do not get the free update to the PlayStation 5 version, which is, I could be wrong with that. I did look it up just before the show to make sure that was accurate, and the best thing I could find was Bethesda saying that is the case.
Am I right in thinking this doesn't apply to anyone who simply owns the game, digitally or physically?
Anyone who owns the game outright, digitally or physically, does get the update for free. If you if you're above PlayStation Plus Essentials, you also get the update for free. So it was a bit of a weird situation. I think it wasn't quite ready. It wasn't oven ready, as we sometimes like to say in the UK, in weird spheres of politics and stuff. So they had a few days where they had to try and sort that situation out, which meant I was then delayed a couple of days from playing it. But eventually, it all came off. I managed to play it. Played some Fallout 4. I'm playing in performance mode is what I went for. Started a whole new game, went all the way back, and I've probably sunk maybe like 4 or 5 hours into it thus far. And immediately,
how has it been?
Yeah, no, it's been good. I like that world. I do enjoy the Fallout world. I enjoy the feel, the aesthetic, and all of that. It does feel a little dated. It feels a little tired. Some of that, but that it is. So can't really get around that. Some of the animation side of it, I'm having more fun with the base building than I remember that I had last time. I was kind of over it quite quickly last time, but I'm having a bit more fun with it. Maybe some of the polish from Bethesda has worn off, especially after the Starfield sort of sitch. So I've actually it feels rough around the edges than I remember it being. But hey, at the moment I'm enjoying it. It's scratching that itch that I got after the Prime show.
Yeah, it's also been a long time. Like, I know the patch addressed more than just the visuals and the performance, but there's only so much you can do to kind of polish a 9-year-old game at this point.
Exactly.
It's slightly older game than I think some people remember it to be. But it is interesting you mentioned Starfield and perhaps the kind of the shine or the like veneer surrounding Bethesda and what was once this kind of idea of them making these incredible. Well, they do still have a reputation for making these incredibly large, incredibly ambitious, open-ended RPGs. But something about their reputation for their ability to polish those products and release them in an acceptable fashion since Fallout 76 has kind of, a degree of irreparable damage has been done. They haven't really clawed their way back from that. And it's fascinating now seeing even that being applied to patches. Even their, patches, things that they're just giving out as almost a gesture of goodwill are being, subject to the kind of scrutiny that, Bethesda games just are now.
I think it was the only thing I can think is that it's actually never been any different. And in the past, they were ahead of the curve, and we were sort of wowed. I mean, there was always kind of like a bit of jank associated with Bethesda stuff, but then there always is with open world games and RPGs, because that's the price you pay for having something big and expansive, and you can do a lot of different things. I think though that maybe they've just continued on at the same rate, and the industry has maybe started to surpass what they do. And I think maybe that's why Starfield felt a little bit unfinished and like not quite where we wanted it to be. And I feel like going back to Fallout 4 is, rather than there being real issues with Fallout 4, it's just like a case of saying, oh, this actually is not that too dissimilar to some of the issues I had with Starfield. Even though I was someone who enjoyed Starfield and had a good time with Starfield, and I'm sure that if I stick with Fallout 4, I'll have a good time with Fallout 4. But yeah, some of it is. And we'll get onto this. There's a question that was just burning in the back of my head while I was watching the Prime show and while I was playing Fallout 4, which is, where is Fallout 5?
Yeah. Well, let's roll straight onto it because that's a nice segue. Obviously, the Amazon Prime TV show has been an overwhelming hit. It's been confirmed inside the past week that the show was watched by 65 million people in its first 2 weeks, which makes it the service's second most watched show ever. I think second only to its name escapes me, but that Lord of the Rings show that they made, I think a couple of years ago. Was it Rings of? Is it Rings of Power? Is it just that?
I believe it was the Rings of Power. Yeah.
Which, hey, if you were going to pick a kind of a franchise to go head to head with when it comes to popularity, Fallout being on a similar level to the Lord of the Rings, even though, of course, that series was mired in a certain amount of controversy and reactions from the public maybe weren't as overwhelmingly positive as they were in the case of Fallout, it's still not a bad comparison to be able to make. But that, of course, inevitably has led to many fans like Jonesy clamoring for their fix of Fallout, and of course being left in a situation where all they can do is turn to old games. We talked last week about how Fallout 76 was obviously blowing up in incredibly unbelievable ways. Fallout 3 in New Vegas also receiving all kinds of boosts thanks to this renewed interest and energy around the Fallout franchise. But Fallout 4 obviously has received the biggest bump in players, and in some respects, whilst it would have been nice to maybe get it a week or two earlier than it dropped, this patch has appears to have been what is a very well-timed move by Bethesda amongst a sea of perhaps slightly less well-timed moves and business decisions. That being said, Jonesy, before we move on from the patch, I do just want to make note that as you yourself have experienced some difficulties with it, albeit largely in the process of actually getting access to the patch and the current gen version of the title in general, players on other platforms are noting a bunch of different issues related to the patch. I'm seeing some reports that the Xbox version, I don't know if it's been fixed as of recording, but it appeared at one point to have an issue where there was essentially no quality mode. It appeared as though whichever toggle, whether you had the performance toggled on or off, you were always getting 60 frames a second, which was always nice. But it did mean that for anyone who wanted that kind of higher resolution and increased LODs and all that kind of stuff at 30 FPS, didn't have that option. That was reported by Digital Foundry. I did see some people with various shades of green in their avatars on X, suggesting that Digital Foundry were a part of some kind of widespread cover-up or conspiracy theory that was trying to spread, I'm being deadly serious, trying to spread lies around the state of the patch to kind of denigrate the good name of Bethesda and Fallout. But I have personally no reason not to trust Digital Foundry. I think they do some of the most thorough and reliable, technical sort of explorations into the performance of certain video games on the market. So, yeah, you're welcome to sit on whichever side of the fence of that debate that you'd like, but that seems pretty cut and dry to me. Even more problems, though, Jonesy, on the PC side of things, where people were a little bit nervous about this patch because the PC, in many ways, because of how heavily it's been modded over the years, didn't really need this patch to begin with. And indeed, it has caused all of the problems that people anticipated, from breaking mod load orders to corrupting saves. Apparently, the ultra-wide support that was meant to be implemented has been kind of botched. And in fact, certain UI elements, for example, are just stretched into ultra-wide rather than actually being reworked, which looks pretty ugly, especially on such a UI-heavy game. Lots of other issues, and even just little things like sort of very old school issues relating to the original release of Fallout 4 that haven't been fixed in this patch, despite the fact that technology has moved, in huge ways since then. Things that are the standard now that admittedly weren't when Fallout 4 came out, like for example, RTX graphics cards still have significant issues with various graphics modes that sometimes Fallout 4 tries to run by default. They can cause crashing. It doesn't seem like there was any attempt to fix any of that on Bethesda's side, which led to a lot of people being underwhelmed by this patch. But it sounds as though, Jonesy, all that negativity to one side, if you were just a PS5 or an Xbox Series X or S owner who wanted either a better looking or better performing, admittedly not flawless, but still a version of Fallout 4, you're going to get that, and it's going to be free. You are going
to get that. It is going to be free. And I think that's one thing you have to remember is if you're not paying for the update, they didn't have to do it at all. Like, it could have just been something which they said, the game's 9 years old, this isn't happening. That having been said, I don't think that gets an excuse for letting stuff slide. You would have hoped that they would have addressed most of these issues before it got released, especially with which is the real thing, which is obviously this was this was coming out just after the release of the Prime show. So surely the whole part of the reason was they're thinking, oh yeah, we want a bunch more people to play Fallout and to get excited about it on next gen. And so maybe it's actually just done them a bit of a disservice by having some of these issues and not getting rid of most of these bugs before it was released. I had one slight gripe, which is going to sound ridiculous. So one thing I love about Bethesda, I love about Fallout, and I really like they did with Fallout 4, and I remember at the time was everything to do with like the UI, the Pip-Boy, and all of that sort of world stuff was fantastic. And if you remember, they did an accompanying Pip-Boy app that you could connect your PlayStation to your phone, and you could use it too. I attempted to use the app to connect to my PlayStation 5 because of course I did. Why would I not do that? And it wouldn't connect. You could not connect your phone to your PlayStation 5, and I couldn't actually find any way to do that. I found a lot of people saying it's not doable for some reason. Not really sure why. If that's to do with
Is there any messaging on the Bethesda side, like when you download the app, for example, that talks about compatibility issues, or you can see when it was last updated or anything like that, or is it just all kind of?
Well, most of the stuff I could find effectively said that the support for the app was discontinued years ago, and it was actually delisted apparently on the App Store, and so you had to like find a link because it was still live, but it wasn't listed in the same way, so you can still download it, but it's not kind of supported. So there's nothing. I mean, there's no reason they should actively support it.
Yeah, if it's been delisted and it isn't being supported, then I can give them a bit of a pass.
Yeah,
for that.
Absolutely,
especially because. Let's also, this isn't me firing any shots, Jonesy, but it was really just a gimmick to sell that special edition that came with the physical Pip-Boy that you could put your phone inside of.
No, I see. I at the time I had it and I thought it was a nice touch because as you played the game, I did have the Pip-Boy, but you remember I got it because we for our old channel, All Time Gaming, we gave it away. And the only reason I got it was because when I went to game to buy the game or to pick it up, at midnight on launch, because it was a bit of fun. They had loads of the Pip-Boys, and they said, oh, does anyone want one of these collector's editions? Because we've got a number of sales that were whatever didn't go through or whatever, so they had them there for like, I can't remember, it was 120 quid. And I think there and then I was like, oh my god, I'm going to get one for the channel and we can do a giveaway. And we did, and it was cool.
Yeah.
But I used the app on my phone without, not intending to use it with the collector's edition. And I thought it was a really niget touch. I love that kind of integration.
There's no way that taking at least one hand off your controller, if not two, so you get to hold your phone in such a way where you're scrolling through the exact same UI and menu that you can have on your TV screen, except with the increased lag and latency that comes from.
It was just a bit of fun.
But it's stupid.
It's stupid, but a bit of fun. I like that. I like it when people make useless things they probably didn't need to just to kind of long it out. I think it's a little bit of excitement. Can I have 30 seconds to give someone a shout out?
Of course.
I need to give a Randall Flag in the chat a shout out with the super chat of £10 Thank you so much.
Hey.
Who Randall said, towards your Stellar Blade fund, I missed the beginning of the pod where you were chatting about it because I was busy totally playing it properly and not climbing up and down ladders. So thank you so much, Randall Flag. And we will put that towards our Stellar Blade fund, and we will hopefully be able to do, like we said, some of that proper research and spend some real time making sure we're getting to grips with everything Eve.
Exactly. Is there a photo mode in
There's gotta be, isn't there? I'm gonna look at it right now.
I feel like again that might end up being a vital component of my research. So thank you very much, Randall, for your contribution to the We're Definitely Not Pervs fund. While Jonesy does that little bit of extra market research on Stellar Blade, though, any results?
No, there is no photo mode. There is no photo mode yet.
Oh, they know what they're doing. Okay. Well, as Randall Flag said, there are plenty of ladders. We'll be able to find all the necessary angles to do all the research that you would expect of a very
I've got a share button. I've got a share button on my controller. I don't, I'm fine without a photo mode.
Yeah, but a photo mode with a free cam where you can really
Oh,
get up and,
okay.
because because you want to see
I see.
they've done such good work to create such a detailed environment. You really want to see the textures of the rain drenched concrete of
rain.
you really have to get up close and
Imagine if they had a GIF
admire
mode.
it.
Imagine if they had a GIF mode in the photo mode, so you could actually capture a couple of seconds of movement for the rain.
Oh,
Course,
right.
for the
Okay,
rain.
yeah, that would be interesting. And maybe you could even loop that playback. So, like, if the rain were like bouncing, for example, off something as a raindrop landed, you could like loop that bouncing animation over and over and over again, and just stare at it for as long as it takes you to, get your fill of rain.
Absolutely, yeah. That is something. As said in chat, maybe it's a charged DLC which should be released.
Yeah, $250. Right, that's apparently the going rate for a hotly anticipated DLC. That is probably the amount of money that some hardcore fans would pay to play a brand new Fallout game right back now. But unfortunately, there is no such option to do so because, as we've hinted at, well, as everyone knows, with the worlds returning to the Fallout 4s and the Fallout 76s and the Fallout New Vegases and 3s out there is currently no hot new Fallout to play that was strategically timed with the launch of the Amazon Prime TV show. And unsurprisingly, Jonesy, this has apparently irked a few people, maybe even a few higher-ups at Microsoft, who are perhaps slightly less familiar with how the video games industry works and how long these things take to make and how much they cost to make. But apparently there were a few kind of like odd looks when it became clear that they had released a Fallout TV show that had reached an audience of 65 million people, and Bethesda were kind of just stood there with their hands in their pockets when it came to any new Fallout-related content that they could sell for real money, even if a lot of people are actually going and buying games like, well, actually most people aren't buying games, like 76 is on a lot of subscription services. Fallout 4 was heavily do you know what? They're making a little bit of money. They're not making as much money as they'd like. Which led to some suggestion that Microsoft, Bethesda, Xbox Game Studios might be looking at ways to kind of expedite or speed up the process of getting a new Fallout game into people's hands. Now, there were never really any kind of confirmed reports. There was just some murmurings that these kind of conversations were happening. But one thing that was interesting was that in the past week or so, Todd Howard was actually doing the rounds a little bit and had an interview over at Kind of Funny Games, and he wasn't directly asked to comment on the idea that there was maybe a bit of a panic going on behind the scenes to get some Fallout content out there into the world, but he was asked some questions along those lines, because obviously at the moment Bethesda Game Studios they're a one-game studio. Starfield released last year. The Elder Scrolls 6 has moved into full production, and that means that any sequel to Fallout 4 is likely many years away. So when he was asked about the long wait between Bethesda's new games, he said, they do take a long time, and so I think one of the things we're focused on here is obviously making sure they're the highest of quality, but also finding ways to increase our output, because we don't want to wait that long either, right? It's never our plan, but we want to make sure we get it right. Which is, he's never been grilled on the issue before, per se, but is something of an admission on Todd Howard's side and Bethesda's side that things might be better off, they might be better off, Xbox as a platform might be better off if they can get some of these large-scale RPGs out slightly quicker, or if they were maybe slightly more efficient in their development processes. He was then asked if this had led to them discussing the possibility of partnering with external developers, for example, on non-numbered entries, which they've done in the past when Obsidian developed Fallout New Vegas, or mobile spin-offs, basically saying to Todd, like, hey, we know you're probably trying to speed up the rate at which you can make these big RPGs, but have you considered going into an even more extreme measures to try and just get something out there? Hey, like, maybe you can find another external developer out there, get them up to speed with your engine as quickly as possible, and have like a non-numbered Fallout in there in the next 2 years. Those are my words, not anyone else's. But Todd said, I would say we've always had those conversations. We did a lot of things for the show. It might seem like there isn't a big new game out, but we added content into 76 for the show, and 76 has a really great map expansion that's coming this summer with Skyline Valley. So we look at what we're doing with the franchise and say, do we still feel good about, and I can't reveal it now, our runway for Fallout as a franchise? When is Season 2 happening? What are we doing on mobile? What are we doing on 76? What are we doing with this thing? What are we doing with this other thing? When are these landing? The implication being that there are Fallout irons in the fire, but just that we shouldn't necessarily expect any one of them to be a big bad Fallout 5 anytime soon. Jonesy, what do you kind of make on the whole situation? Firstly, on the extent to which you think it's fair to kind of suggest that Bethesda had kind of been caught with their pants down by not having anything new ready for the launch of the show and the popularity of the show, or whether they were maybe caught off guard by just how many people have watched it. And two, what you think about the kind of the long-term pipeline, maybe not just for Fallout, but for the Bethesda in general, or whether this sort of this rollout of, you know, one new major RPG every, well, like close to 10 years at times is feasible, and how they can make that more efficient.
So I don't think I don't really think they should be sort of whipped for the fact that they didn't have a Fallout 5 ready to go. Like when I was watching the show, like I said, I was like, where's Fallout 5? But the reason I was thinking that was because I'm like, well, look, Starfield was like 9 years in the making. Fallout 4 was a long time ago. There's not even been talk of a Fallout 5 in early stages of production, or, you know, even on the cards. Even if when this show was given the green light, they had started production on a Fallout 5, we'd still be 4 or 5 years away from Fallout 5. I feel like that, so it's not that relevant in that sense. It is frustrating, and I think that the issues that Fallout 76 had would not have helped any of this, because obviously if you get, what's the thing, once bitten twice shy, right? So if yes, maybe you're thinking to yourself, do you know what, let's get Starfield out, let's get some real good feels back for Bethesda. You know, little did they know what was going to happen with Starfield. But to my mind, like, now that Bethesda have got now that Xbox have got control over that franchise and have seen how well the show did, and like you said, 65 million people, second biggest show on Prime. My immediate thinking, if I'm Todd Howard, is nothing to do with Bethesda with regard to Fallout. My thinking is, as you said, like, my thinking would be go to another developer, and it would be looking at something like an Alien Isolation game based in a vault, because we've seen what that world can offer, and there could be an infinite number of vaults, if you like. And you go, we're doing something completely linear, completely different, Fallout universe. We're going to make a linear horror game, which is going to take a year to package and put together. It is going to be slick AF, and it is going to be in people's hands, and they could have done that whilst that they were having the series made, and they could even get that done now before Series 2 comes out, just to kind of like foster that feel for the franchise. And I think you still have those tentpole big RPGs coming through from Bethesda every 8-10 years, whatever it is they need. But yeah, I think that's the way the industry is moving, with doing more, as Ubisoft has shown us with Prince of Persia and with Assassin's Creed. Right. I think there's a lot more scope for this now. Take a franchise which people love, does well, and do more with it. And I, for one, sure, if someone said Fallout and it wasn't a full RPG Fallout game, I may be a little bit hesitant. But then if I got my hands on a really well made, really put together narrative linear game that was set in a vault, which was, you know, that just scratch some of that itch for the world and tick some of those boxes, I'd be happy as Larry. Like, especially if that came out, like, you know, every other year you got something like that, and one time it could be a survival, it could be it could be a linear horror game set in a vault, and one time it could be like a more psychological detective series where there's something's gone on in a vault and you're having to go around and figure out and solve crimes in a vault. There's so much they could do with it, and that's not even getting into the overworld, having to worry about the irradiated wasteland. I'd be so up for that. I
think it would definitely be really interesting, and like I think, again, it's fascinating to consider the possibility that approaching other studios with these licenses and with these franchises opens up the door for other genres to be explored. And I suppose then it becomes interesting to consider maybe why Xbox haven't moved as heavily in that direction as you might have assumed they would have so far. Like they've been accumulating studios for a long time now, and they have subsequently in the deals that those have entailed have been accumulating licenses and IPs and franchises as well. And yet it still kind of feels like one studio or the studio that kind of was always grandfathered in with a certain franchise will continue making Halo games or will continue making Gears games until some of the kind of the interest around those franchises maybe slightly withered out. I'm wondering if it's because Xbox purchased a lot of these studios with a lot of goodwill, and and there's a lot of very open conversation about what these studios want to do, and a lot of their first desires or initial desires are, we've got the freedom, we've got the backing of Microsoft, we've got the money, we want to make something new, we want to make something we've never made before, we want to make we want to use this, we don't want to get bogged down in a franchise that someone else has created. Like someone else I was reading this week pointed out that between Bethesda, In Exile, and Obsidian, Xbox Game Studios is host to the 3 studios most directly associated with all the Fallout games, going back to the origins of the series. And yet, when you look at like what In Exile and Obsidian are doing, they're off making Clockwork Revolution and Avowed, respectively. These big, ambitious new games that Microsoft's ownership has now allowed them to do. Do you think there's going to be a possibility that when some of these big new titles and these big new IPs have kind of launched and they've been out there, they're out there on the open market and they've been allowed to kind of sink or swim, and we know whether or not Avowed and Clockwork Revolution are going to become hit new games, then maybe, as Phil Spencer hinted at with Arcane following the disappointment of Redfall, Xbox will be a little bit more prominent when it comes to stepping in and saying, hey, we value your expertise, that's why we bought you, but you're not going to be able to make whatever you want anymore. And that's where we get to see a little bit more. You're making a third-person cover shooter in the Halo series, or you're making a Forza game where you can get out of the car.
It is difficult, isn't it? Because you've got to imagine that, for example, like when you buy all these other studios, it's not like your management team grows directly in line with the number of other companies that you're buying up. So you've still got a limited capacity to make decisions, I suppose. And especially when you have so many IPs under you, I guess it's hindsight's 2020. It's very easy for me to look back now and say, "Hi, they should have had the foresight to do this with the IP that they own." But I think you're right. I think that they have to look back on some of the things that have happened, and they have to say, no, we don't want to take IP away from the people that made it. We don't want people to get the idea that if Xbox buy you, you lose control over your own IP.
Right, that's a very good point.
They do need to do is to maybe come at it from a different angle, which is to say, you control the canon, the lore, you control the IP, and how the games originally exist, but we're going to maybe have the option to do more with them in different ways with some of our other studios without treading on your toes as like the big main focus games. So as you've said, you can take certain teams and put certain groups together that you've got, and you can say, oh no, you're going to now make and almost make it together. So you can take a team, like the old Obsidian team, and you can say, hey, Bethesda guys, you're going to speak to these guys and you're going to develop this together, or you're going to have a hand in it, so that they never feel like they're totally separate from what they're doing. I think there's a way to do it. I think there's a way to do it very smart. I think there's a way to do it so that the fans are served, so that the devs are served. And maybe it's just getting there. Maybe it's a new world and they're just trying to get there, and they're not there yet.
But then I think Todd didn't mention it by name, probably because it's it's a little bit out to pasture by this point. But Bethesda have experimented with this before with Fallout Shelter, which I believe that was. I think they kind of they held the reins to that the whole time, but primarily was an external development job. But that that was probably something they kept a very close eye on. It captured the kind of the spirit. And a lot of the central kind of the ideas and look and feel of Fallout, albeit in a completely new perspective and in a completely new genre. And that was, broadly a pretty successful experiment. Certainly, financially, I think it was pretty successful. You've got to be careful.
People out there don't hate me for saying this, but I imagine, I don't mean this to be offensive, but at the same time, I almost feel like some people would think if you said, "Oh, we're going to make an app to go in," they would go, "Oh yeah, whatever. It's not a real game. Just you can do it." I imagine there's part of that as well.
Yeah, but the people who wouldn't go, "Oh yeah, whatever," are the people who are wearing the suits at the top of the company who are asking these questions.
Right.
They would hear the idea of a very well-timed Fallout app and
Yes.
go, "Oh yeah, baby, that smells like money." And of course, you have to be careful because there's only so many times you can go back to the well when it comes to creating like mobile spin-offs based on various franchises. And Fallout and the Elder Scrolls have both already had that treatment. And in the case of the Elder Scrolls Blades, in spite of some of its good ideas, it never really landed in, I think, quite the way they wanted it to. I think that game even came to Switch at one point, and like you don't hear very many people talking about Blades. I wonder how many people even remember that game exists.
I don't.
Well,
you said it, I was like, I don't think I've ever.
There you go. There was a mobile Elder Scrolls game that was actually kind of like weirdly ambitious in a lot of ways, but also kind of frustrating in others. You know, go figure. There's a lot of mobile experiences, so it's not an infinite well that you can plunder, but it is something that can stop gaps. But then again, we also have to be cognizant of the fact that, like, as fans and as people who want to play good games, we shouldn't be in favor of mobile stopgaps that are there to hit financial targets and to tie into TV series, and should just be in favor of good games that come about naturally and are developed for the right reasons. Which, at the end of the day, I guess that's more or less what Bethesda are doing. Like, you know, I don't, you know. In many ways, maybe we should almost be celebrating the fact that there's not some weird cobbled together Fallout game coming onto the market in the next 12 months, because, you know, they're not kind of adhering to the pressures of the popularity of that TV show, right? Like, they're sticking to the plan, which is what usually leads to better products.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like I said, there's you could have a million ideas. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be good. And it is the case that as a fan, as a consumer, like, it can be quite short lived that we get a high from seeing something you like in a new medium. It does particularly well. It could have been the case, like, more with the Halo show. Not to rag on the Halo show, I've not seen it, but it could have been the case that it didn't do as well. It wasn't received as well, and then they were lamenting the fact that they just sunk another 20 million into some small, third party game, or that now they're worried is gonna flop. I'm glad I'm not them, having to make the decisions and have these opinions before the fact.
Bringing up the Halo show is I hadn't even occurred to me, but that's a brilliant point, and it goes to show just how difficult it would be to kind of call the shots on one of the, you know, sometimes even being lenient, you know, the 2, 3, 4 year long runways that you have to kind of manage and juggle in trying to time things accurately for something like this. And you're right, like, if they had just made some big budget splashy Halo tie-in title, a lot of people would be like, it would still be popular because it's Halo, but people like you're tying this into that the show.
Yes. Oh, you know as well, that would make it even worse. For some reason, it would just make it worse. It would be like, what have you done? And so, could have been the problem with this, but luckily not.
No, luckily not. Although, talking about kind of the idea of extremely popular, TV shows being spawned from video games and so on and so forth, I did see kind of a very interesting tweet earlier on from that I wanted to get your thoughts on, from Sam Barlow, of course, writer and director of such hit games as Immortality. He quote tweeted the stat going around about Fallout reaching 65 million viewers, and said, "Not long now until we have our first 'we made a burner video game in order to sell our movie' move." The kind of the slightly scary, and I don't want to like misuse the word dystopian, but like, yeah, slightly scary and like foreign idea that someone like who's going to be the first company to make essentially make a video game as an excuse, as a way of selling a movie or a TV show. Weird, but yeah.
Yeah, I could absolutely see that happening. Yeah, like, it
doesn't seem financially viable unless you go about it in certain ways, but it's an interesting thought, right?
Yes, but because you'd imagine that it's going to be, their idea would be, oh yeah, it'll be easy. We'll just make a game. We'll make it on Unreal Engine 5. It'll be easy, and you'll end up with the crappiest game ever because it's just gonna. They're so obvious these days. You can't do a ET tie-in game these days. It's not that easy to put a video game together that's actually going to sell and people are going to play. So no, it's definitely, it probably costs you more to make the game than it would cost make the TV show these days.
It depends potentially, but then again, it was just last week that we were talking about. I think I mentioned when I was talking about Life Eater, I talked about how last year Strange Scaffold, the devs had released El Paso Elsewhere, which was kind of like a Max Payne 2000s era, third-person shooter, and that had received like solid, like it's on a 78 on Metacritic, and that has announced that they're getting a film adaptation by the Bonaventura Pictures with Lakeith Stanfield in talks to star and produce.
Oh, okay.
So like
I stand corrected.
Again,
fair.
That's probably a drop in the pond, but there are some people out there in the film industry who are clearly have got half an eye on the video games industry for these even slightly smaller, more kind of off kilter or unorthodox titles. These independently developed video games that maybe have a unique style or look or kind of story thread to them or narrative concept that they can pinch for another industry.
Well, was it Twisted Metal was a weird one that I didn't see coming. Like, like Fallout makes sense. Like oh god, The Last of Us. Jesus Christ, The Last of Us makes total sense. But yeah, Twisted Metal, like who saw that coming?
Twisted Metal was weird. Twisted Metal even weirder when you consider that, again, if the insiders are to be believed, the video game reboot of Twisted Metal that was being developed, it has since been cancelled.
Right.
Even the video game side isn't going back, and now we're getting a second season of the Twisted Metal TV show.
Because apparently the TV show's actually pretty good. So bizarre. Yeah.
Which again is another reminder of like for as many of these kind of conversations as we have when we're talking about Fallout, we're talking about Halo, and we're talking about all these games. Like one of the kind of threads that does run through a lot of these conversations is one of the best ways to make sure your thing is at least somewhat successful. Make it good. There aren't very many good things out there that just disappear into nothingness.
If there was one thing I could give anyone advice for in life, it's like no matter what you do, whatever it is you do in life, just try and make it good. Because even if it's crap, even if it doesn't work, and at least it was good in some way. At least if it wasn't popular, at least it was. You tried to make it good. You didn't just make a bit of tat, and then. And just be like, oh well, my bit of tat didn't work. Like, fine, just make it good, and then even if it doesn't work, at least you can be proud of it.
Yes. Although, when we're talking about the games industry, Jonesy, there is an asterisk there, which is that you can, of course, make it good. ... Eventually, as we've seen that happen many times over the years with the video games industry. Of course, the examples that everyone is probably immediately thinking of. The likes of No Man's Sky, Rainbow Six Siege, games that have had extraordinary turnarounds when it's come to their public perception and popularity. And one such game that Mr. Todd Howard is hoping experiences such a turnaround, although it's not working from too bad a place to begin with, is, of course, Starfield. The other thing that came about as he was doing these recent interviews was the future of that game. He, in fact, revealed we are probably going to get a fairly big patch inside the next kind of couple of weeks. I can't remember specifically what that addresses, but at the moment, a lot of eyes, are on Shattered Space, which is the upcoming expansion to Starfield. And whilst we don't know exactly when that is going to be launched and be set upon the world, we do have a better idea about when we might find out when it's going to launch. As Xbox today announced the official date for their Xbox Game Showcase, it's going to take place on June 9th. I think there were already pretty strong murmurings about that. I think that date was basically already set in stone, but they have confirmed it, and they have also released it alongside a piece of key art and an announcement that it will be accompanied by a direct for an, at the moment, redacted title. If you remember this time last year, they did something similar where the Xbox Game Showcase was immediately followed up by a very long and very in-depth look at Starfield. And almost like, I remember watching that Starfield Direct last year and being like, this is a lot of information. Like it was almost like difficult to contain everything we were being told about Starfield this time last year. Although it's unlikely that the same phenomenon will reoccur this year, as apparently the redacted title that is going to be subject to a direct following the Xbox Game Showcase is in fact this year's entry into the Call of Duty series. Jonesy, again, the Call of Duty, some people are just totally over it at this point. I will note, just for anyone that isn't, apparently, whether it actually ends up having this name or not, we'll find out. But this is going to be a game that was at one point known as Call of Duty Black Ops Gulf War. The key art here appears to refer to Project Cerberus, or just Cerberus, which is a relatively known thing at this point. In fact, that this piece of key art currently exists within the Modern Warfare 3 game files and is referred to as Cerberus. Obviously, Xbox now, as the home of Call of Duty, as weird as that is to say out loud, they have kind of a bit of an obligation, maybe not a literal one, but sort of a spiritual obligation to make a big deal out of Call of Duty because it's a big deal for them now. But does it feel a little bit weird to you that this time last year we were like, thank God, like an hour or 90 minutes, whatever it was, of Starfield because we need to know about this game, and this year we're plugging that same gap with a Call of Duty title?
Yes, that does feel very strange to me. Like Call of Duty's fine, but Call of Duty's is almost like at this point it's an annual thing. It's nothing special really. I mean, and it can be like they can show you some really exciting stuff for Call of Duty. So I'm not going to completely poo-poo it and put it down, but it's never going to be the thing that you sort of get really excited about. And to have basically just Call of Duty is, I don't know. Shattered. I'm really hopeful that like Shattered Space would do something big for Starfield. I don't see that it can at this point. Like it seems, I think you said it. You've alluded to it. Like there's a lot of games which really turned it around. I struggle to see how Starfield can at this point, because it doesn't feel like the sort of game. It's much more like there is a narrative, there is a story. The story finishes.
Yes, and you have finished that story, you personally.
I have, yes, and so the point I'm at, I would really be, I would be up for a DLC. I would be up for more stuff and to experience more in that world. I wanted to play some of the post game stuff more, but the post game side of it was nowhere near enough to sort of bring me back. Whereas something like your No Man's Skies or even like I can't even think like other titles that have really managed to bring people back in over time and do a lot to sort of keep people going. They are usually games that have less of a narrative that kind of has a definitive end. So like the story in No Man's Sky was the narrative was kind of almost irrelevant. Like following the anomalies was almost just like, oh, this is just experiencing the universe and giving you a reason to carry on playing. Whereas Starfield literally had a narrative, a story. You got to the end of it, you met a load of characters. It was, I don't know. I like I'm going to say it. I like Starfield, and I hope more people end up liking it. And I really hope they can do more for it. I fail to see what this patch is going to be. Like you said, it's going to be a big patch. I don't know what the big patch is going to have in it, but I'm hopeful. I don't know. I'm hopeful that ends up being the big thing, and that Call of Duty is just kind of like, oh, and there's a cool looking Call of Duty.
It could end up being that. It's so hard to say. For reference, the patch that's coming fairly soon, I believe. I don't know exactly when. They're looking at things like new shipbuilding features, finally implementing maps for the cities, new gameplay and difficulty options, and additional surprises. So they're being, it's still very much in that phase where like it's a patch. It's like an update, and
it's quality of life stuff that should have been there months and months ago. Like it's that sort of stuff now is not gonna. It's not No Man's Sky levels of we've introduced a whole new way to traverse. We've introduced vehicles. We've introduced mechs. We've actually put multiplayer into the game. Like it's nothing big like that. And they're not going to do 19 iterations of this big patch going through the years. So
no, correct. But the wording around Shattered Space, it having a name and being referred to as an expansion, that could suggest bigger things are in the pipeline for Starfield. I also think
Shattered Space has got much more scope. I think, for sure.
Yes, and selfishly, as someone who fell off Starfield relatively early on in my time with that game, I'm looking at it going, great. A game that I still have a relatively large amount of patience for in terms of potentially going back to it one day is getting bigger and better as every month that I wait and go without playing it. There's also still the potential of the capacity, although, Xbox are never going to say this out loud anytime soon. If Starfield does come to consoles later on, like if there is a PS5 or PlayStation version of Starfield waiting in the wings somewhere, it's just a bigger and more developed and kind of well-rounded version of the game for those players, which kind of sucks a little bit for Xbox fans, but that's just the way that the cookie crumbles nowadays. As we saw this week with, Sea of Thieves. Like, Sea of Thieves just launched on PlayStation. It's like, shock horror. That game got like 20 Metacritic score higher than it did at launch on the Xbox because it's the best version of the game that's ever existed.
Yeah.
Anyway, Starfield and Call of Duty aren't the only things to look forward to this summer when Xbox have their E3-like show. And according to The Verge's Tom Warren, who has been unusually loose-lipped when it comes to some of the stuff he's been willing to talk about around the show, we can also look forward to, as was rumored, admittedly, a couple of weeks ago, and actually even inside the last week when one of the game's voice actors kind of leaked it, it does seem as though a new entry in the Gears of War series, potentially just Gears of War 6, will be revealed to the world in June. Jonesy, I feel like by the time Gears 5 came around, I can't remember where we were at as a society when it came to like Game Pass and specifically Game Pass for PC, but it wasn't quite at a place where you could go like, yeah, I'll give it a go. Has that changed since Gears 5, and is Gears 6 kind of one of those no-brainer, yes, I'll play this because I've got Game Pass titles for you? Or are you slightly put off by the fact that it's got the number 6 after it and you have no idea what the fuck's going on?
Okay, I'm in slightly.
Multiple questions at once.
No, I have a secret to tell you.
Oh my god!
So it's actually a different question you're asking. The question you're asking me is, will I be signing back up to Game Pass?
Oh, you pulled a Chris.
I did pull a Chris. I hadn't played it for a while. I'd finished Starfield. I'd sort of moved on for a bit, and so I thought, why am I paying toward this? And I think it had just gone up in price as well. I am someone who has always been in love with Gears of War, with like the aesthetic and the way that it plays and everything, but never having an Xbox as a kid, didn't really get to play it, and that didn't really change. Even when I had access on Game Pass as I got older, I would love to play Gears of War 6, if I'm being completely honest.
Okay.
So I may well, and with Shattered Space coming, it may be that I do have to break out the credit card again and sign back up to Xbox.
Interesting.
Game Pass.
And you know what? It's funny that you kind of make note of like you kind of looking towards the calendar and things you have to look forward to, because one of the other things that Tom Warren over at The Verge was kind of quick to point out was that he expects that we'll get a lot of release dates for some of the games that we already know about. They're going to flesh out the remainder of Xbox's calendar for this year. And if his speculation is to be believed, it does seem like they are kind of targeting this pattern of, hey, let's make sure we have at least one major thing a month so people always have a reason to keep their subscription going just that little bit longer. So obviously Shattered Space will arrive sometime this fall. We don't know exactly when. But in the meantime, The Verge expects Call of Duty to arrive in October. Avowed and Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 to arrive in November, and Indiana Jones to arrive in December.
And this month, we already referenced at the top of the show, we've got Hellblade 2 Senua's Saga coming out at the end of this month. So yeah, it really is a bam, 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 like month. So yeah, I am for sure looking down the barrel of the rest of the year. Like, there is stuff I want to play almost every month on Xbox Game Pass.
Yes, and hopefully in a way that they can flesh out even more kind of come June. That would be nice for them if Hellblade lands well in May, reviews well, does decent things for subscriber numbers. If they can come out in early June and be like, not just here's the rest of the year, but maybe here's a hint at 2025. Tom Henderson, another kind of insider leaker, he dug up and retweeted one of his articles from, I think, last year about that weird Wu-Tang Clan inspired action RPG that I personally would be extremely excited for. Little things like that. If that ends up being like a Hi-Fi Rush style, here's a £30, £40 game that you wouldn't have bought, but we're just gonna. That's not me suggesting they shadow drop it, but as we've been saying for years, Xbox have more than enough studios and more than enough resources to have a very solid year-round Game Pass favoring lineup, and it's high time they make good on that. So
definitely.
So we'll find out more in June. Before we go, though, Jonesy, let's round out one more story by just having a bit of a laugh at a developer's expense, which isn't something I encourage all too often because the games industry can be a tricky place. But when you read a little bit more into the story, and especially some of the prices that are involved, it's hard not to. Of course, we're talking about the absolutely bizarre situation that has emerged within the Escape from Tarkov scene surrounding its PvE DLC in the past sort of week or so. Especially funny to me, I don't know if it's the same for you, Josie, because Escape from Tarkov always just seemed to be this like fascinating, extremely hardcore game with a really kind of intense and committed fan base that seemed completely unmoved by anything else going on anywhere else in the industry.
It's scary.
Yeah, but for all this to bubble over in such a public way,
yes,
I know. Yeah, it was kind of like fascinating that like the lid came off Escape from Tarkov, and all these people who had spent the last few years of their life getting killed by one bullet were now getting really angry in very public places.
yeah. It's almost like you have a friend, a couple who are a friend, or in your friendship group who are this like slightly angry, scary Russian couple that you don't really want to, you don't ever want to pry and get into their business, and they never really let much go, and then one day they come to the pub and they're yelling at each other, and you're like, what? Spill the tea. What's going on? And then everyone starts to take a bit of interest. But yeah, so there we go.
Yeah, I know. So what this revolves around is a major new addition to the game. I say the word addition because there has even been some debate back and forth between the developers and the community about whether or not it should be called DLC. But it's essentially a PvE mode for Tarkov. So the Unheard edition, and there are multiple editions of the game that we're going to have to wrap our head around, so I apologize if I get anything slightly wrong. But basically, a new version of the game called the Unheard edition of Escape from Tarkov was announced as part of this latest release, or this latest offering, which promised players this brand new PvE mode and various other bonuses. That edition has now launched, and fans were not happy with not only the bonuses that it gave, but also its massive $250 price tag.
That is
which
madness.
that on its own, a $250 price tag, and the fact that some of the bonuses it was giving were not appeasing to fans would be crazy in its own right. But unfortunately, it actually gets even weirder and sort of slightly more troublesome. Because this new mode is exclusive to players who buy this new $250 version of the game. And that is despite the fact that anyone who purchased a previous version of the game that was referred to, was called the Edge of Darkness edition, was promised at the time all future DLC content as part of a season pass, which players, understandably assumed would include this new mode, which led to a lot of people who owned this this Edge of Darkness edition very annoyed. They were then suggested that they had to upgrade from the Edge of Darkness edition, which would then cost an additional $100. But then basically they got into a big back and forth with the developers over why BSG didn't think that this new mode constituted DLC. There were some very unhelpful additions from the league community manager, who's called Applezor. This was over Discord, as you'd imagine, with a name like that. So who said it ain't DLC? It's a unique feature of the new edition added. Statements like that were then there were additional statements that were made on Reddit, a lot of which were immediately greeted with a large amount of hostility as BSG continued to try and argue that essentially, hey, this new edition isn't DLC. That's why it's not included in the season pass that Edge of Darkness players have already bought. That's why you then need to buy this $250 version of the game.
It's just semantics at this point, isn't it? Like it's so redundant to say. To spend, get people to spend a lot of money on your game for a season pass where they get all DLC and then release something and go, yeah, but we've called it an expansion. And you're like, yeah, come on, but you knew why I paid you the money. You knew why I got the season pass. Like we're just aren't we just like blowing smoke up each other's ass at this point? Like come on, man. You knew what I wanted. You knew what I knew what you were giving me, and now you're just trying to get a bit more money out of the fan base. Like it does feel pretty filth.
Does it seem for you to be even more filth that these semantic arguments are taking place when the purchase prices involved scale as high as $250 though? Like
No,
that also, that's a massively important context, I feel.
I 100%. If we were talking about like $10, $20, I'd probably say, oh, okay, like the developers, maybe this was something extra they hadn't planned on doing, so maybe it is different. But I think when you're talking about such a massive amount, like asking people to upgrade and saying, yeah, but it's going to cost you $100 to upgrade from this season pass, like you've already got for all the DLC, that just seems astronomical. And one thing, because I don't know enough about the PvE mode that they're implementing. Like, is this that? One of the things that makes me wonder if it is the reason they've attached such a high price tag to it and what they're doing is maybe because they're thinking it's going to put a lot of extra players in who aren't so keen on the PvP side of it, and so they're thinking that they can grab a few people for $250. So they didn't want to give people the option to, oh, it's a cheaper way of getting it if I go over here and I buy this other mode with the season pass. I don't know. It feels a bit like a cash grab, and that they think they'll be able to squeeze some people for $250, which is a lot of money. Like a lot of money for effectively one extra game mode and some bonuses.
Right, like especially when it feels like I don't want to take any kind of like snide shots at Star Citizen here, but it kind of feels like that sum of money that is explicitly targeting that kind of captive audience. You know, whilst
Yes.
yes, I'm sure there is a certain number of people like you or I who are put off by how hardcore Tarkov is and could theoretically be slightly more intrigued by a PvE experience. We're also the kind of people who will look at a $250 price tag and say, absolutely no way. It feels explicitly, and I've got to be careful with my words here because I don't know if this is actually the case, and I don't play the game, so I don't know the value of these things inherently. But it feels like a price tag that is there to take advantage of people who are already kind of like in that kind of walled community who are committed to Tarkov, who this is their favorite game, this is the game that the game that they play, and like that's the cost of keeping up with a mode that they want to be a part of. I know that there were other excuses made to do with kind of like server capacity, and even though that the PvE mode would inherently not be kind of as quote unquote online as the PvP mode, there were still kind of server side things that kind of mapped your progression and like your ability to get into games and things like that. And then people were asking them about potential like P2P servers and all that kind of stuff. And it was a really kind of like ugly back and forth for a little while that has kind of since been settled, as the developers have now essentially U-turned over the weekend. They have promised essentially that everyone would get to play the new PvE mode eventually, but only after the game leaves early access. Because for anyone wondering, Tarkov is still a game that is in early access.
Does this feel a little bit like, and maybe I'm really reaching here, does this feel a little bit like classism in gaming? Like they're saying, if you've got the money, if you've got $250 to spend on our game, you can have the thing you want, and if you haven't, you just don't get to.
In a way, yeah. And I think that ties directly into kind of that point I was making about knowing you don't release something like this and price something like this unless you know you've got an audience of people who will pay for it.
Who
It
can
reminds
and
me
will,
when you
yeah.
hear about it reminds me when you hear about mobile developers talk about knowing that they have whales in their community and knowing that they can afford to release like £500 bundles, because for as much as people like you and I look at them in the store and go, oh my god, who needs that many gems? People buy them. They release them because people buy them. And when we were charging 10 20 times the going rate for something, you need 10 20 times fewer numbers of people who are willing to be able to make that purchase to make the exact same number of revenue. So I think there is something to that. I just think that what's fascinating here is that it's taking place like so explicitly, and it's not like a weird like pay to win thing. It's not like for the best gun in Tarkov. It's not for an unlimited stash space. It's for a whole new mode. That's the part that really strikes me as unusual about it.
Yeah, but and for me, it's like I said, it's been a while since I've watched Tarkov content, and for me, it's like I didn't realize that they were crying out for like a PvE mode so much that
I think
they
cheating I think cheating has been an issue. I think there are some people who very much like the Tarkov formula, but that PvP has become a little bit kind of like testy, which was another reason why this being kind of like paywall to such an extent was so controversial, because this was for some people seen as almost a way of like prolonging their journey with Tarkov and continuing to be able to just play the game they want to play.
Oh, I see. That makes it
Yeah.
sound. That makes me think it's even worse then, because you've got people that
It's
just
not
really
good.
want to enjoy the game and like have a good time, and now they're being told, yeah, you can, man, we can. And it's something that, let's be honest, the developers should have sorted out, like the cheating side of it. They should have implemented something to stop that. But actually, what they've ended up doing is going, if you want to play a game mode that you enjoy and there's no cheaters, it's going to cost you 250. And you're like, come on, like. Yeah, and do we know? Is there any idea about when it's going to come out of early access?
So currently they're slating that it's going to come out of early access by the end of the year,
Right.
which means that people who own the Edge of Darkness edition, or who bought the Edge of Darkness edition but not the Unheard edition, I believe the Edge of Darkness edition has now actually been discontinued. So from this point, everyone is either Unheard edition or bust. But those people, were told that they would get access to the PvE mode once 1.0 of the game had been released later in the year. I believe that they have gone even further than that again, now saying, I think the day after they announced that, they announced that they would actually be opening it up to those people even sooner than that, but doing so in waves until more server capacity is added. So, the longer this situation rolls on, the more they are rolling back the situation and trying to appease fans. But I think the thing that's still fascinating about this to me is that while they are being forced into U-turns, and they are completely understandably being forced to kind of acknowledge that the people who purchased the Edge of Darkness edition should be eligible for this content, because using semantics to try and claim that this is a feature and therefore not DLC is utter bullshit. Nothing about the U-turns that they're making or the decisions that they're walking back has anything to do with the price. And that as of the time of recording, if you still wanted to go out and buy a version of the game that would be eligible for this PvE experience at one point or another, you're still buying the Unheard edition, and it is still €250 with the site up in front of me.
Wow.
Then there's a €115 version called Prepare for Escape. You then get Left Behind at €86 and Standard at €52. But at the moment, again, unless the website is also out of date, which is admittedly very possible with how quickly things are changing, the Unheard edition, because you can no longer buy the Edge of Darkness edition and then you go through that upgrade path, the Unheard edition at €250 or dollars is still like the way of getting access to this mode. And if you bought the previously very expensive version that had all the DLC, you will be ushered in when the servers are ready for you. So it's bizarre. It's truly quite odd, and I don't really know what to make of it.
It is a real shame, and it's one of those things that, especially when it's bad enough when it's when you understand it and it's about games that you play, but when it's something like a community of people and you just hear about them having to go through some real shit, it does suck. And you think, but part of me then is like, I'm so glad I'm not part of that community, which is weird because a lot of times when you see people play like Escape from Tarkov, I often think, oh, I'd love to get involved in that. I'd love to have a go at that. And now it's just like I'm now like, no way would I want to go and get involved in any of that.
Again, it's not the exact same thing, but a community that you are somewhat of a part of that I feel similarly about is Star Citizen, where every time there's shit released for that game, or I hear something about the prices of this, that, or the other, or I hear that someone has spent this much money on a ship, or that they're giving you the possibility to spend this much money on the ship, I almost have a weird degree of sympathy for the people that are part of that ecosystem, that are financially invested in Star Citizen, or just not even financially, just invested in general. They've invested their enjoyment, or they've committed to the game to some degree. And I'm like, I feel sorry for the people that, and admittedly, they have the option to spend large amounts of money on ships that are that alter one tiny facet of what is being promised to be a very big game. But there's still a similar kind of like psychological effect of like just the amount of money being talked about here that I feel like that this shares with Star Citizen in my mind. You could tell me otherwise, though.
I don't know. I don't think it doesn't seem the same to me. Purely because I think the difference with Star Citizen is when you're buying a ship, like I've got, my ship in Star Citizen is pretty modest, and I can still do everything everyone else can do.
Right, yes, that's a very key differentiator, yeah.
I think that's the difference for me. Like, if you want to go and you want to buy like a massive armada not an armada, but like a massive what I don't know what they call them, but like a massive ship with like that can take 50 people and has turrets and guns and decks and da. You can do it, and effectively you're buying something which designers have gone and had to spend a lot of time and like making and designing and working on. Obviously, what's frustrating about that is they're not spending the time on the game to get it you know, made and ready and actually released properly, which they really should do. But at the same time, it's not going to detract from my enjoyment that someone else has access to a ship like that. Like, I'm not going to go and spend, I don't even know, £2,000 of real money on some ridiculous ship. Like, I can see them flying around and go, wow, that's pretty cool. Whereas I think it would irk me more if that I knew there was a whole mode in the game which I wanted to play that I just couldn't. So for the analogy I would use is like I can't remember what they call it, this single player campaign inside of Star Citizen, right? So I've bought a version of the game that has access to that when that's finally released. It's only been like 12 years since I paid for it. But let's say, for example, they now released a single player campaign which was called something slightly different, and I wasn't allowed to play that unless I spent another £100. Then I would be livid, and I think that would be more like a similar situation.
I should clarify, I'm not trying to draw comparisons between like a new mode, like a PvE mode, and a ship in Tarkov and a ship in Star Citizen, and like what that offers in terms of gameplay experiences. I guess what I'm merely commenting on this idea that like they are both games that seem extremely foreign to me. They're both games that I feel like that feel extremely far gone in terms of like the direction they've gone and the community they've fostered. That feel like completely inaccessible to me. And they're both games that feel like whether again this could be completely
you can
dump
dump loads of money into.
But yeah, that they have found they've found this captive audience that they've kept within this walled garden and like normalized this way of, because I'm looking at the Star Citizen thingy now. Like yes, you can still buy ships. You can buy ship upgrades. There are now apparently Star Citizen subscription services. Like if you wanted to be an imperator.
I don't know.
It's one of those. It's like a Roman thing. Like because one of them's centurion, the other one's this, which is the best value. You can start spending $20 a month on Star Citizen and get flares and discounts on merchandise.
I was subscribed for a little while to one of those, like the bottom.
There you go. I'm looking at that and I'm like, these are people who are kind of like trapped within this ecosystem and have been normalized to the extent where like spending hundreds of dollars on a single product is just a thing that you do for the game that you've fallen in love with. Whereas the rest
you're
of
not wrong. You're not wrong. There is
most of the industry is sitting around going, God, isn't it crazy that games are $70 now? And that there are these people out there who kind of sit there going, yeah, I've hacked the system. I only play one game. And yet, depending on which game that is that you play,
the amount of money
like sign your life away to. Yeah, like I had no idea that people were spending hundreds of dollars on Tarkov. I just had no idea.
No, me either.
That's what made me have the sort of Star Citizen kind of weird comparison, as long-winded as it was.
Maybe I'm a little too involved. Maybe I'm too into the Star Citizen thing. That I suppose that seems a little less to me. But now, when you say it like that, I'm like, yeah, damn, it is kind of similar, isn't it? Because once you're in the ecosystem, you're in the ecosystem, and then you feel compelled to put more in. And I was someone who I started off with a little ship, then I put a bit more money in and got a bit of a better ship. Then I put a bit of money in and I subscribed for a few months and got some other stuff. Then I got a slightly better hangar, and you're not wrong.
You'll still watch all the live streams, and you'll still believe that the Star Citizen dream is like going to be realized at some point. Yeah, exactly. And it's like
it will come out.
I'm not suggesting that there are those that then those equivalents exist in the Tarkov world. Tarkov seems like a slightly more sort of like compact and like simple title by comparison. But yeah, it's one of those things where you look at it and you're like, okay, dude, like if that's worth $250 for you, then then go for it. Like, do your thing.
Yeah.
If you really want to play the PvE version of a game that I was always under the impression was almost exclusively about PvP, then go and do your thing. I'm not going to rain on your parade. But hey, video games, we've all got our weird quirks. One thing we can all agree on, you, I, and anyone watching or listening, is we've all spent money on some either a video game or some portion or facet of a video game that we would be embarrassed to admit to the general public.
That is definitely true.
Whether it's a mobile in-app purchase, whether it was the weird Patreon you signed up to so you could mod the Sims so they would all fuck each other.
My next one will be Little Kitty in the Big City.
Little Kitty in the Big City, which again, I need to remind you, Jonesy, as much as anyone else, not a vagina game.
Oh damn! Yeah.
Although again, like you talk about the ideation that goes on in this podcast, we've come up with an alternate version of Little Kitty Big City that is all about some anime chick getting railed. We've come up with breastfeeding DLC for Still a Blade. We've come up with a Alien Isolation inspired horror game set within the Fallout universe. Like I'm sorry, but at this point in the process, there have to be listeners out there who have access to the resources or the contacts to get the ball rolling on these kind of projects. It's ridiculous.
And look, we just want to let you know now that you can license these ideas for as little as £10,000 per idea. All you have to do is contact us through the Discord, and you can get access to them.
And when Amazon Prime are on the phone looking for the right to make a TV adaptation of Little Kitty Big City, we get assigned to that deal as well. And when 70 million people watch Little Kitty Big City in the first 2 weeks, we'll get the last laugh.
We will indeed.
But fortunately, Jonesy, the good news is this isn't the last laugh that you will get courtesy of the Super Show podcast, because we are going to be back next week with more gaming jokes, banter, news, discussion, TNA by the sounds of things, actually, by this time next week.
Hopefully, extensive research, Stellar Blade. Let's just do the legwork, figure it out.
It's the legwork. I like it. maybe a bit more than just the leg, if you know what I mean. That's it for this week's podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to join us, same place, same time next week for more gaming goodness. Jonesy, thank you so much for joining me on this tit-tastic voyage of gaming discovery. I hope you had a good time.
I did indeed. Well, thank you, mate. Thank you for hosting and doing the tough job. So there we go.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you to you once again for watching and or listening, for supporting on Patreon, for joining in the chat if you've been watching us live, wherever, whenever you are. We appreciate you, and hopefully we'll see you back here, same place, same time next week. With that, we say